Last night, something happened that should terrify every American. Donald Trump didn't just have another outburst. He spiraled on live television. He screamed at reporters, slamming his hand on the table, calling them stupid for simply asking questions.
Are you stupid? Thank you very much.
Then, just after midnight, he jumped on social media and used a slur against the governor of Minnesota before threatening to strip American citizens of their nationality. And while the country was still trying to process that, he wandered back into the Mar-a-Lago ballroom, the same place taxpayers are quietly funding his endless vacations, and started dancing to YMCA as if nothing had happened. But here's the part the media missed. All of this chaos points to something far darker unfolding behind the scenes, and by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly what everyone else has overlooked. Earlier in the day, or more accurately, earlier in the evening, Donald Trump held a press conference that quickly shifted from routine to confrontational. A female reporter asked a straightforward question about vetting for individuals arriving from Afghanistan.
U.S. officials say that the suspect worked very closely with the CIA in Afghanistan for years and by the FBI of these Afghans who were brought into the U.S. So why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let him in. Are you stupid?
Noting that the Biden administration had conducted deep background reviews. According to the established timeline, the asylum granted to the individual linked to the Washington, D.C. shooting occurred during Trump's own term. Instead of addressing that fact, he snapped back with, "Are you stupid? Are you dumb?" repeating the insult rather than answering the question. And here is the part most people overlook. She was asking about a basic process, what vetting was done and who approved it, a question any leader should expect. But Trump dismissed it outright, exposing a familiar tension between scrutiny, accountability, and deflection within federal decision-making. While that exchange was still circulating, Trump moved to social media and published a long Thanksgiving message. The official White House account urged Americans to read every word, because within that post, Trump used an offensive slur aimed at Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. The message ran for what felt like pages. Trump wished citizens a very happy Thanksgiving situation, then described the nation as divided, disrupted, carved up, murdered, beaten, mugged, and mocked by what he called foolish countries. Embedded in that message was another sweeping claim, that the so-called foreign population now stands at 53 million people, and that immigrants come largely from welfare programs, prisons, or mental institutions in failed nations. These are assertions, not verified facts, and they illustrate how rhetoric often blurs the boundary between opinion and evidence. Then the message shifted again. Trump described Governor Walz using a derogatory term, framing it as a quote. He went on to claim that Somalia has taken over Minnesota, and that Somalian gangs now run the state. Allegations not supported by authoritative data from state or federal agencies. He then targeted Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, saying she was probably illegal and probably came in illegally, despite the absence of substantiated evidence for that claim. He then escalated further by calling for the denaturalization of migrants, a process which, under U.S. federal law, 8 U.S.C. Section 1451, can only occur through a federal court and typically requires proof of fraud during naturalization. He argued they are security risks or non-compatible with Western civilization. Yet federal law makes clear that denaturalization requires proof of fraud at the time of naturalization, not cultural disagreement or political criticism. Courts have reaffirmed this distinction for decades, underscoring the legal limits on such proposals. When viewed together, the two storylines, the confrontation in Washington and the sweeping accusations directed at Minnesota, form a broader picture of how rhetoric can shape public perception of citizenship, identity, and belonging. This was more than a press conference or a holiday message. It was a moment where language pressed directly against the legal and cultural structures that define what it means to be an American. And for those who have watched these patterns reappear over the years, it raises a deeper reflection. What happens when political language drifts further from established legal standards? So here is the question that lingers. If leadership increasingly relies on accusation rather than evidence, what does that mean for the institutions meant to hold the country together? It's just Donald Trump speaking like a Nazi right here. He then goes on to say, only reverse migration can fully cure this situation. Other than that, Happy Thanksgiving to all. That was Trump's Thanksgiving message. Now, this morning, The Telegraph has published a bombshell report claiming that Trump is preparing to hand over Ukraine's occupied territories to Putin, a conclusion drawn from leaked communications reviewed by their newsroom. The report is explicit about Trump's position, but the recordings behind it have not yet been independently authenticated by U.S. intelligence, which makes the implications even more alarming. That's what our traitorous, treasonous, Putin bootlicking President Donald Trump has done the day after Thanksgiving, now that he's been what? Fully exposed as a freaking Russian asset based on the audio recordings that we've seen of Steve White having Donald Trump launder the Russian plan of surrender to Ukraine. So, in my opinion, when you launder the Russian plan of surrender and you try to force it on Ukraine, who should be an ally, yeah, that makes you a Russian asset. Russia, Russia, Russia. Yeah, right before our eyes, you treasonous traitor. But here's what the Telegraph's reporting. Trump hands Putin Ukraine's occupied territories. I would just say this to the Telegraph. He could say that he's doing that, but this foolish ranting, raving lunatic doesn't have the right to do that. He can say whatever he wants, but the coalition of the willing, the European allies, Canada, Australia, they're not saying that. Ukraine isn't saying that. So in Donald Trump's demented mind, and in the demented mind of Putin, they could believe that. But that ain't what's actually happening. Trump sends an envoy to Moscow with a plan to recognize Russia's war gains, is how they're framing it. So Witkoff, who was on that audio recording speaking with Dmitry and speaking with Yuri Yechkov and speaking with all the Russian leaders, that's who Donald Trump is sending again with Kushner to say, Putin, this is yours. Take Ukraine. What a despicable human being this is, right? I mean, can we wake up people for a second and realize that there is a treasonous traitor piece of crap in the White House? Just stop treating this individual with any shred of respect. Don't even call him the president because this individual is a despicable human being. I can't even tell you how angry I am this morning at him and this entire regime. Here's, by the way, what he does. He sends Jeanine Pirro, the Fox host, right? The wackadoodle Fox host who's now the top federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. So, she now goes on Fox this morning, the old Fox host who's now running the Justice Department's Washington, D.C. federal office. She goes on and she starts to say, look, the problem with the D.C. shooter was that there was no vetting by Biden. Don't even get me started. We know there was a lot of vetting done by Biden. You know when the issue probably arose in April 2025 when Donald Trump was focused on arresting or using the FBI and Immigration, Border Patrol, and ICE to go after people in factories and to go after people in restaurants and to go after people on farms and people in Home Depot parking lots and go through peaceful communities knocking on doors and throwing people into concentration camps. The next layer of this story takes us deeper into the federal machinery and into a pattern that many of you watching have seen unfold more than once in your lifetime. While Trump was focused on what critics described as alligator Alcatrazes and expanding detention sites across the country, another allegation surfaced, that key national security units were being dismantled and that a 22-year-old Heritage Foundation intern named Thomas Fugate, a landscaping worker by background and a vocal Trump supporter, had been elevated into a counterintelligence role within the FBI. That is the allegation, not a confirmed institutional record. But it raises the quiet question most Americans would ask. How does a system built on experience and chain of command end up placing someone that young in a position touching national security? And here is the part most people overlook. These federal disputes played out at the same moment Jeanine Pirro, now described as serving in a top prosecutorial role within Washington, D.C., took to television to frame the issue not as leadership failure, but as a story of no vetting. Again, we separate clearly. This is her claim, not an established fact. She invoked the chaos at the Kabul airport during the Afghanistan evacuation and said the Biden administration conducted no vetting at all. The emotional appeal is clear, but the statement remains disputed and oversimplifies a complex federal process. From there, the narrative shifted again. Pirro praised Trump for involving law enforcement partners to protect communities. But the National Guard is military, not civilian law enforcement, a distinction rooted in long-standing federal law. Most Americans, especially those who lived through earlier eras of unrest, know the weight that comes with uniformed soldiers patrolling domestic streets. And here is where system-level thinking matters. If the issue is crime, why not strengthen and fund local law enforcement rather than escalate to military presence? Why weaken federal, state cooperation in blue states, only to reframe military deployment as community policing? Then another clip surfaced, an exchange about comments by Senator Dick Durbin and Representative Alyssa Slotkin, who had expressed concerns about militarization in American cities. Pirro responded with outrage, implying that critics were disappointed the National Guard had not used force. That assertion is an opinion steeped in political heat, not a documented fact. Yet it illustrates how moral accusation is increasingly used as a proxy for policy debate. And here, the state-level storyline meets the federal one. Pirro cast herself as the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, asserting that the president made the decision to protect the people of the district, especially after the city recorded the fourth highest homicide rate in the nation 2 years prior, a data point supported by publicly available crime statistics. But the framing raises a deeper question. Protection through which mechanism? Civilian policing? Federal coordination? Or military escalation? When you step back, both tracks tell the same story. At the federal level, accusations of mismanagement, questionable appointments, and rhetorical escalation shape national perception. At the community level, debates about policing, public fear, and military involvement frame everyday life. These are not isolated disputes. They are recurring patterns that echo cycles from past administrations and past decades. And perhaps that is the reflection worth holding on to. When policy arguments begin to rely more on emotional charge than verifiable process, the line between security and spectacle grows thin. So here is the question that lingers for all of us. Are we watching genuine efforts to protect American communities, or are we witnessing the machinery of power shifting into something else entirely? Now, homicides are down 60%, robberies are down 50%, carjackings are down 74%. These figures are presented as proof that order has been restored and that critics should, in Jeanine Pirro's words, thank God that President Trump is the president. But when you look more closely, what emerges is not simply a claim of success. It is a narrative built to reinforce a broader national argument that force, centralization, and federal reach are the only pathways to safety. And here is the part most people overlook. Public safety statistics often move with economic cycles, policing strategies, regional variables, and community trust, not just federal policy alone. While that federal storyline was being elevated, another thread unfolded on the economic side. Kelly Lelayer, a billionaire overseeing the Small Business Administration under the Trump administration, appeared on Fox, which critics often describe as state-aligned media during this era. She was asked a practical question: small businesses are suffering. What relief would they receive? Instead of offering a roadmap or structural fix, her immediate response was blame. Biden did it. Biden. That is an opinion, not a policy answer, and it reflected something deeper. A political reflex to deflect rather than confront the complex pressures facing small business owners today. And here is where the two storylines begin to mirror one another. On one side, critics claim the administration uses selective data to present strength. On the other hand, economic frustration gets redirected into partisan blame. This is not new. It is a pattern that repeats through multiple administrations and multiple downturns. But watching it happen again, in real time, reinforces a familiar truth. When leaders avoid responsibility, public trust erodes. The larger economic picture underscores that fragility. According to the commentary, small business optimism dipped again in October to 98.2, down 6% from September. That decline, as described, stems from lingering costs absorbed from the prior administration and workforce shortages. Up to 32% of surveyed businesses had at least one job they could not fill, a significant stress point, and positive profit trends dropped 9%. These are reported anecdotes and statistics presented by the commentator, not official government releases, but they paint a picture of rising strain on the very communities that form the backbone of American commerce. Then came the broader question: what relief is actually coming? Lelayer responded by pointing to what she described as Biden-era inflation raising price levels over 20%, and for some small businesses, 40 to 50%, combined with a heavy regulatory agenda. Again, these are her characterizations and opinions, framed through the lens of political contrast. She argued that President Trump was digging us out of that through working family tax cuts, permanent pass-through deductions, and immediate expenses. She also blamed an October Democrat shutdown, claiming it blocked $5 billion in SBA lending from reaching Main Street. That figure, as stated, is an allegation from her interview, not a confirmed federal accounting record. That affected 10,000 small businesses, and about 65,000 small businesses didn't have their government contract as that news circulated. An AI meme made the rounds showing Miss Piggy pointing at Donald Trump and telling him to be quiet. A darkly humorous echo of the past week and a half. During that span, Trump called one reporter quiet, Piggy, posted a message mocking a New York Times journalist as ugly inside and outside, used a slur for the governor of Minnesota, attacked Somali communities, and confronted a reporter who asked a basic question about asylum vetting in April of 2025. According to public accounts, the former President Biden administration had conducted extensive vetting, and the individual in question reportedly worked with the CIA for more than 10 years in Kandahar. Yet the exchange ended with Trump repeating, "Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?" The reporter cited the DOJ Inspector General, who stated that DHS and the FBI had carried out thorough vetting for Afghans entering the United States. Trump dismissed it again, saying they all came in on a plane along with thousands of other people. From there, the conversation shifted dramatically. Trump began boasting about golf, saying he wished he could play more because he was outperforming younger players. He claimed to have won 38 club championships, including one the previous year against a 27-year-old opponent. He added that the fairway does not know your age, and called himself a very low handicap player, insisting every one of those 38 victories was legitimate. The commentator then shared specific data. Trump had spent 83 days on the golf course since returning to office, roughly 27% of his second term. The comparison was pointed out. If everyday Americans spent 25% of their year golfing, they too would be excellent players. Adam Cohen joked that Trump might be confusing the number of golf championships he claims to have won with the number of wars he says he ended. The final layer centered on new economic data. Bloomberg reported that high coffee prices will remain despite Trump removing certain tariffs, because once prices rise, they rarely fall back quickly. Trump suggested he might eliminate income taxes entirely, funded by tariff revenue. Yet the broader trend was more complicated. Optimism among small businesses declined again in October, dropping to 98.2, about 6% below September. Many businesses were still absorbing costs from the prior administration. Up to 32% had open positions they could not fill, and positive profit reports fell 9%, with expenses either absorbed by owners or passed on to customers. Taken together, these federal narratives, the rhetoric toward reporters, the shifting explanations on vetting, the focus on golf, and the economic uncertainty, intersect with the everyday struggles of small businesses across multiple states. It paints a broader pattern. Political noise at the top, rising pressure on households and local enterprises, and a public increasingly caught between conflicting claims and incomplete solutions. Reflection: when the nation faces rising costs, worker shortages, and declining optimism, can any administration rely on distraction and blame, or does real stability demand something deeper? And more importantly, are these patterns isolated moments, or signs that the system is drifting further from the people it is meant to serve? When you compare the numbers, only $27 billion in tariff revenue against more than $2.6 trillion from individual income taxes, the gap speaks for itself. Tariffs are not replacing the tax system. They simply shift the burden back onto American consumers. And when groups like Women's March release stark ads about ICE, it shows how deeply these policies cut into the lives of real families. If this breakdown helped you see the broader picture, tell me your thoughts. Like the video, share it with someone you trust, and make sure you subscribe so we can reach 6 million voices standing together. Stay plugged in. Your engagement is what keeps this conversation alive.